Even in grief share, they said a person that loses a child, typically it takes 10 years to get back to the normal. Like 10 years to adjust.
Right.
And I remember thinking 10 years, I have to feel like this for 10 years. And I just was like, can't do it. Can't sit in this for 10 years. And every time I let out a breath, he breathed his spirit into me. He breathed his power, his strength, and so now anytime I'm having trouble breathing or when I can't catch my breath or I'm struggling with anxiety, I just can take a long, deep breath and imagine God on the other side breathing his power into me, breathing his strength into me. And I think that can be so helpful for anybody who's struggling. I'll always carry it.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to put this down. Like it's something that I'll carry in my heart forever. Like even the trauma, I pray daily that, God helps me through it and that I can help others maybe if they need it.
Hi guys, today we are going to be doing a challenge and it's last to fall off these 15-pound weights and we're going to stand on it like a hoverboard. Yeah, you ready to get started? Yeah! He's only 4, so he doesn't really know anything. Alright guys, well, it's the end of the video. I have 120. See you next time. Bye!
Hey, it's Joey Svensson, and the little boy you just heard was Vinny Talerico. In spring of 2021, he was diagnosed with leukemia and tragically died shortly after. His family was and is a part of the Seacoast church family. Today is an hour spent with his mother, Kira, who wrote a book called Where Was God? It's a sobering account of the most devastating journey a parent can walk through. Now, throughout the book and for the duration of our talk with Kira, you'll hear about the grace of God, his provision, his working in the most dire of circumstances. In some ways, it sounds like some miraculous workings, but you won't hear that dampering the pain and sadness of Kira, whose heart will always grieve to have her boy back. I appreciate so much her candor and realness as she doesn't gloss over the nightmare she's walked through. It reminds me of Jesus' words, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." I think oftentimes you'll find that Christians want to bypass "you will have trouble" portion of that passage and camp out on the "but take heart" part. But to be fully human, one has to be honest that pain is indeed a reality we all must and will face during this journey we call life. And this doesn't exclude those whose hope is in the Lord. So may our hope be firm as we walk together in life. And when it's not, may we lean on one another. So we're going to drop right in as Kira and I were talking off air, but the record button had been pushed and she started to share some things I thought was very valuable to the conversation. We're right in the middle of talking about the immense difficulty for a parent to proceed in life after losing a child. Thanks for listening.
Well, and that was partially why I wrote this, because I really felt like God was so clear on what the choice was, like what his decision was.
Yeah.
And I also was walking with people who were going through the same. 2 other of my friends' kids died within 6 months. Not friends, but people I knew, people I was, like talking to online, had been walking through long things. A 15-year-old and another 10-year-old. And then at the time, my mentor, Kathy, had tried to connect me with another girl who had lost her 3-year-old.
Right.
And she was very stuck.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm not stuck.
Right.
I'll always be in it. But I was like, well, if I can write something that can help other people who are already here, on maybe a different way to think about it, it's never going to get easier. Even in grief share, and this is one of the things that was interesting, was they said a person that loses a child, typically it takes 10 years to get back to the normal. Like 10 years to adjust.
Right.
And I remember thinking 10 years, I have to feel like this for 10 years. And I just was like, can't do it.
Yeah.
Can't sit in this for 10 years.
Golly. Well, we may just include some of what you just said because that was very insightful, but we're here with Kira, right? Mm-hmm. All right. Talerico?
Yes.
All right. I get nervous with names.
No problem.
But we want to welcome patrons who are watching live. And then for those of you listening and watching on YouTube after the fact, it's just me and Kira. And it's going to be a tough conversation. I know mainly for you, but for me too. It's as a parent, and we'll get into this a little bit because I'm really curious of your thoughts on just what's healthy as far as reading a memoir of yours and hearing your journey of losing a child and then putting myself in your shoes. I found myself doing that, and I was like, I can't. I don't want to.
Yeah, it's definitely hard.
But I'm curious of whether or not that's the more empathetic route or just wasted pain or self-induced pain. But we'll get to that. Tell people where you're from.
I'm here in Charleston, and I'm originally from Chicago. My husband, we lived in Pittsburgh for a while. My husband's family is from Pittsburgh, and then we've been here for about 11 years.
11 years.
Yep.
How long have you been at Seacoast?
Same. I knew that when we moved from Pittsburgh to Charleston, I needed to find a church home. I mean, that's the easiest way to meet people, and it's hard to relocate. And so I found Seacoast before we even moved here, knowing that I was going to plug in as soon as I could.
Yeah, yeah. So you lived in two very cold climates. Are you digging the warmth of Charleston?
Yeah. I don't think I could ever go back north. It's just not. Love it here. It's paradise.
Yeah.
And love it.
It's not too hot for you in the summer?
No. In fact, the longer I'm here, the more I'm like, oh, February's too cold. 40 is too cold.
Well, you wrote Where Was God? Faith in Times of Trouble, a Mother's Journey Through the Loss of a Child. I'll just hold that up for people watching. And I've told you this, but I'll tell our listeners that we had this interview scheduled a while back, and just some personal things I was going through. I couldn't have this conversation. I just was like, I don't think I can just get in the right headspace. And I'm glad I did that, just because it actually gave me time to read through the whole book. So I've told you that I've read through it all. And so let's go back to that original question. As I was reading the book, there were times when I started to think of what you were describing and the images that you were presenting. Very good writer, by the way.
Thank you.
Did you know that you were a good writer before writing? But you've probably been told that.
On occasion. Yeah, and I always felt like there was something there, but I didn't really specifically have something I wanted to write about. But this was on my heart since the moment it happened, that I needed to say what happened.
And it really does just jump right into, oh my gosh, this is already intense.
Yeah, I mean, it was intense for us very quickly. Just the premise, he was only sick for 18 days. He was in the hospital for 18 days before he died. We didn't know he was sick before that. He was jumping in pools and having a good time and just a regular and crazy 9-year-old kid. And we just didn't know he was sick.
So do you think there's some good in having those sorts of thoughts? Like, what if I was the parent? What if this is my child? Is that more empathetic, or is that putting needless pain? We've talked about this on the podcast, actually. And I guess as I was talking it out with my friends on the podcast, my guesswork would be that in some regard, it probably is helpful because it helps you to empathize and put yourself in someone's shoes, but there's probably a healthy cutoff point.
Absolutely. I mean, even at the position of being in the PICU and knowing that we were in a real bad spot, I still didn't consider that he wasn't going to make it. I don't think any parent can. I've seen many people be at what seems to be the end of their cancer journey, and still it's not something you consider. It's just almost impossible to think of. So while I do think it's, good to maybe put yourself in someone else's shoes on occasion, just so you can have compassion and empathy, and what would I do in that situation? No, I don't think it's necessary to dwell on.
Yeah.
I watched the movie Courageous a long time ago when it first came out, and I remember thinking it's about, a son who loses his daughter, and at the end of the movie he comes to the realization, I'm thankful for the 9 years I got, instead of thinking about the future that was taken away.
Right.
And I remember thinking, I don't know, that's hard. I don't know that I have the kind of faith that would be able to be grateful for what I did get, and not focus on what was taken away. And now being in that position, you just can't understand it until you're there. Yeah. And you really have to rely on God to get to that point.
Yeah. Would you say almost just the opposite extreme of emotion? It's almost like I've told my kids before, you just don't understand how much I love you, and you never will unless you have your own kid. Would you put that in the same camp, just in the opposite direction? Like you can't know what it's like to lose a child until you've actually walked through it.
For sure not. Yeah. And I think it's okay for us not to even focus on that. I will say my anxiety is different. I'm a lot more relaxed now about things, which is funny. You'd think it'd go the other way.
Right.
But more I'm like, you know what? I don't have control over any of this. We did everything we possibly could. All the doctors did. God was clear. It was not in my hands. And so now I'm just a little bit more relaxed about all kinds of stuff.
Well, when you said that, it made me think that the worst possible thing that could happen to you happened. So it's almost like, and I do want to give you permission to, because I think it's good for our listeners. If I say anything that's a little insensitive or just out of ignorance, please call me out on it.
Sure.
But it's almost like I've experienced the worst thing that could happen to me. What else do I have to fear?
Right. I mean, yeah, there's definitely that. And I am, from what God has shown me, he's in control and he's been with me the whole time. So I just have to trust that whatever comes next is his plan.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, before we get into hearing a little bit about Vinny and then you telling people a snapshot of however you want to present those 18 days, people really should dive into the book. I highly recommend it. There seemed to be a lot of, from the onset of the story, some oversight from the medical profession with misdiagnosis, missing certain things. Like, have you had a shift going through that as far as recognizing you got to advocate for yourself?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure. I was somebody who didn't necessarily question doctors.
Right.
Like, I come in, here's my problem. Oh, this is what you're telling me is right? Okay, I believe it. I am very far from that now. I mean, it's happened over and over, even in other situations recently, that you have to advocate for the people you're in there for. If you have a gut feeling that what they're saying is not what's lining up with what you feel is happening, push for yourself. Because I think that, and the doctors that were at Sean Jenkins, they were compassionate, they were wonderful. They did all the things that I even would know to ask. They were very open about what was happening in the testing and stuff like that. But the doctors before, pediatricians, the ER doctor, not at Sean Jenkins, at another ER, they just kind of blew us off. And I even questioned saying, I don't think this is what's happening. I think there's something more. And they didn't do any tests. And if they had done even a simple blood test, it would have come up. Cancer would have shown up immediately. But he's 9, and they thought, oh, well, a blood test is traumatic for a 9-year-old, which I get, but what we went through is undoubtedly more traumatic. Like, if they would have found it, maybe we could have gotten him help before it had gotten so bad.
Does it spark some anger, or did it? Does it still
Absolutely.
now?
No, I don't think it does now because God was really clear with what had to happen. And there's always that, well, if we had caught it early, would he have suffered for 2 years and then still died? I don't know. I can't know any of that. I just know what happened, and God said that it was his time, and so I just have to trust that that's what it is. Absolutely, it still makes me angry, but that's something I have to deal with.
Yeah. So I want to ask you this too. All through the book, you've had visions. People have had powerful things to share that they're like, I'm pretty sure this is from God. God has spoken directly to you. God has spoken through other pastors with like impeccable timing.
Crazy.
I'll just tell you, as someone who's been trying to follow the Lord literally my whole life, that's not my life experience. Yeah. And do you see yourself at, you know a lot of people and you've been a part of this church for a while. Would you say, I think this is kind of unique about me? This is something that God does in me that doesn't necessarily do with everybody?
I mean, I can only speak to my own experience. I know other people, when I open up and say, hey, this happened to me, they'll have experiences too.
Right.
That maybe they just didn't have the opportunity to share about.
I have had some.
Yep.
But we're talking, I can count on one hand.
It's crazy. I mean, and that's kind of why I felt like God was sharing this with me and saying, you need to share this, because I don't necessarily think that everybody gets such a clear, God next to them saying, this is what needs to happen next. This is how I'm envisioning you, especially, and I'll just pull out the dream that one of my friends had, and I trust her story because I know her story personally, and that's her story to tell. But so when she came with me, when she came to me with her dream, I trusted it was from God.
Yeah.
There have been other people who have come to me with things that I have said, I don't want to dig deeper into that. I don't know that that's from God, and I'm not going to go there. It's very easy to be pulled into that kind of stuff when you are so desperate to hear from your child. I mean, it is very easy to go after everything everybody's telling you, but you have to be really careful to make sure that what you're hearing is from God. And so I believed her when she said, I have something for you. And
was she the same one who had a following dream that she didn't even want to tell you?
Right. And
until there was a car following her?
Yes.
Tell people about that.
So she had a second dream, and she did not want to tell me because it was very uncomfortable for her. And she said she kept saying no until my red SUV was following her around for a week. And she kept seeing this red Explorer at the time following her around, and she knew that was the car that I had at the time.
Day after day?
It kept happening, I guess.
Oh, my God.
And so she was like, okay, God, I'll tell her. And she even said, I feel really uncomfortable telling you this. And I think the imagery is so important because I think this is something that can help anybody in extreme anxiety or trauma or grief. Really, it can happen for anybody. But, it was the vision of me being in a state of pure grief, like just letting it out, and me being in his lap. And every time I let out a breath, he breathed his spirit into me. He breathed his power, his strength, and so now anytime I'm having trouble breathing, or when I can't catch my breath, or I'm struggling with anxiety, I just can take a long, deep breath and imagine God on the other side breathing his power into me, breathing his strength into me. And I think that can be so helpful for anybody who's struggling.
Yeah. And I had mentioned this to you that I think maybe it's one of those deals to where God is so gracious, you've had to go through way more pain than the average person. So I would say it would make sense for God to say, I'm going to speak pretty deeply to her in a way that I don't do to everybody.
Yeah, and I know other people who have lost children too, and they didn't have these things. And I wish that they could, because it is helpful. Like when you just don't understand the why, why did this happen? But when God is so clear and he's there with you, it's kind of like, I understand that this is hard, but I'm here.
Right. Well, I want to hear about Vinny and who he was, but I do want to also tell you that you mentored me through this book as I read it, and you made me cry a lot because I'm a parent. And man, one of those parts was because I could just, like I said, you're a good writer, and I could just feel what you were saying when you found his red shoe. I just broke.
I know. It's a hard thing. And so talking about, as I said before, talking about what happened, I can kind of compartmentalize. I'm really good at that, like detaching myself, separating, discussing what happened.
Yeah.
But when I think about Vinny as my son, that's when it's hard for me. And the red shoe is such a personal, it was him. And to that day, those red shoes sit on the back of our door, like in my husband's shoe carrier, like they'll just always be there. But it's one of those personal things. It's not part of him being sick. It's just like the loss of pulling that out. It's hard.
Right. And for our listeners, and correct me if I'm not remembering it right, but you guys, y'all had to accept that he was gone, and the wave of emotion, the burdensome pain that you were under, and as y'all were moving things out, you found the red shoe that I'm assuming he wore to the hospital, that he also ran around in at home. And
he was a kid who was just like fast all the time. He loved doing hard things. He loved anything motorized. He was quite mischievous. He got into a little bit of trouble sometimes, but he was always just thinking about new things, thinking about things, how to, build things. And so that left a lot of wear on his shoes. He was always doing flips, playing soccer barefoot. He was just like always outside doing things. And so his red shoes, which he loved, he had them in multiple sizes. He would get the same ones every year. He really destroyed them fast because he would drag them on the cement, and he wore those shoes in. And, it's really hard. It's like all of a sudden, after everything we've been through, he's gone. And how do you just, okay, I'm done, I go home without him? I don't understand. How are we just supposed to be like, okay, he's gone, what do I do now? I have to just leave? And so that's what happens. You just have to leave. You just pack up your stuff and go. And it's so surreal and horrible, really. But, and so when we were packing up, because he had hundreds of letters and boxes from people who were praying for him, on our Facebook page, we had 700 people with them, like just following along in only 18 days. And they had sent him all kinds of letters and packages, and we had saved them all so that when he woke up, he would have all this fan mail, And so while we're loading all this stuff onto the cart, we just pull out the last stuff, and there was his shoe in the back, and that was the last thing I pulled out. And so that was a moment that both my husband and I had a moment to really just break down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just leaving the hospital, it's like a brutal closure of, so it's done.
Now what?
Yeah.
We just leave, and I leave him here?
Gosh. Oh my gosh. So 18 days. Mm-hmm. And tell people what year are we talking about?
2021.
2021.
Yeah, he was totally fine from what I knew. I didn't know he was sick. None of us had any inclination he was sick.
And it wasn't really affecting his life in any
Not
sort
at all.
of extreme ways.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that was
bruising.
happening, but like I said, he was just a vivacious little boy who just was crazy. So he had a lot of fun, and bruises were just not something I thought about, and looking back, there are other things that we started to see, but not anything that would have alerted me to there was something wrong. He had been having low-grade fevers on Mondays, and a stomach ache. But by 10 a.m., he was bouncing off the couch and totally fine. Mm-hmm. And so it had happened a few times. He had missed some school, and so the school counselors thought maybe something is happening on Mondays to give him some anxiety. So finally, the Monday that we found out he was sick of the same week, he woke up that night at like 10 o'clock just crying out in pain. And for a 9-year-old, they don't really wake up from sleep unless it's serious. And so we gave him some Tums just to see, is this a stomach virus? What is it? And we're like, if he goes to sleep, he even said it might be serious enough for us to go to the emergency room, which is crazy. But we're like, let's wait it out and see. And he went back to sleep and was fine. And the next day I asked him, how was he feeling? His fever had gone up a little bit. And so I called the pediatrician. He said his stomach still hurt the same. And so she said, why don't you take him to the ER and see if it's appendicitis? So I took him to the ER. They're like, no, Mom, it's just a stomach bug. I'm like, well, I'm a mom of 2 boys. We've had lots of stomach bugs. I know what that looks like. And I don't think that's it. It doesn't feel the same to me. And it's a pain. It's not, they're like, no, it's definitely a stomach bug. If you have any other thoughts and you don't think we're right, you better just take him somewhere else because there's nothing we can do
That was their attitude?
Yes. It was like he threw his hands up in the air like, well, if you think something else is wrong in your expertise, why don't you take him somewhere else because I can't treat a child anyway? And that made me feel, like, oh, I shouldn't have questioned him. Like, he knows, he's the doctor, he's telling me everything's fine, okay. So we said, okay, and the nurse was like, yeah, we've seen a bunch of stomach cases, I'm sure he'll have more symptoms coming up.
And what's crazy is, in reality, he's providing a service that you're going to end up paying for.
A lot of money.
Right.
So that was $700.
Right, so he's working for you.
It was not even 30 minutes that we saw him. And never removed his shirt, didn't look any further, did no testing, just felt his stomach and said, no, I don't think it's appendicitis. And it's just a stomach bug.
Like that, if I was in his shoes, I'd be very uncomfortable with sending him on without investigating. That doesn't make any sense.
It just seemed like he was convinced and didn't see the need to look any further.
Yeah.
So then we went home. His fever went up by a tick every day. By Thursday, I had still kept the appointment with the pediatrician. She saw him and said, well, if the ER said he's fine, I guess he's still, it's probably just a stomach bug. Watch for dehydration. That's the most important thing. So on Friday, his fever was 103, and he was very lethargic. He was slow and, not able to move a lot, and I just was getting really worried, and by 10 o'clock at night, he couldn't even lift his head up, and it was 104, and I administered Tylenol and ibuprofen, and it was not changing the fever, and they said, I always remember hearing, if the fever is not controlled by medicine, it's time to go to the hospital.
Yep.
And so I took him down to the ER. It was a really rough drive. You can read about the details in the book. And when we got there, he fainted. He just collapsed. And I am trying not to freak out as a mom who knows that something is wrong with my child. And they came in, they scooped him up, and they brought him in the ER room. and there was people everywhere, and this was COVID time, so it was just me. They hadn't let my husband go into the other ER, so it was just me in there with him. And they were just peppering me questions, and everybody's going real fast. They got him an IV, and, they're doing all kinds of testing, and he's still unconscious. And they were asking me questions about the bruises on his legs, about him being pale. I'm like, well, yeah, he's a crazy kid. Like, he's not sensitive to his his body. He just goes and does whatever he wants to do. And he's pale because he's been pale all week, and he's had 104 fever. And so they knew immediately. I did not know. I still thought he was fainted from dehydration, even though I had been doing all the things that I knew to help him. And so they came in about 30 minutes later, which I thought was crazy because usually when you're in the ER, it takes hours to get any kind of response. And they pulled up a chair and closed the door and said, "Mom, he has leukemia." And I was like, "What?
Right.
No, that's not why we're here.
Right.
What do you mean?"
Almost like you have you're wrong room,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
That's down ways.
That's not, no. And they were saying some other things.
And how long did it take them to come back and say?
30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Yeah, they just did a blood test.
Right.
And they could see it immediately. And, like a regular white blood cell count for a kid is between 5 and 10,000, and his was at 86,000. And that's a clear indication of leukemia in the blood. And had any other doctor maybe done that test, they could have seen it. And because he was dehydrated, he was having a lot of other symptoms. The stomach pain, eventually, we found out was his spleen was dying, which, what? And I've heard that that's a very painful thing to happen. So that was the stomach pain. We didn't even know for a while. And it turns out his appendix was ruptured, or did have some serious issues. So once we got... they had said, okay, the oncologist, and at this point I still didn't believe them. I thought, okay, the oncologist would be down at 3 a.m. to discuss it with me. So, and when they came in, they said, yes, he definitely has cancer. And we're going to type him. It's going to take till tomorrow, but we'll get him up immediately once we find out more details. So eventually a lot of other stuff happened.
Mm-hmm.
It was so serious that by Sunday night, his blood count was up to 176,000. It had more than doubled in 2 days. And so they got him in to get his port as fast as they could Monday morning. This was Friday night, I just found out. Monday morning, they got him his port, and he came out on a ventilator. They said he was too sick to not be on the ventilator, and they were just by then he was in the ICU. And for 18 days, they did everything life-saving they possibly could, and it just was a no.
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine finding out something about one of my kids today, and then in October 19th, they're gone. And then I have to figure out what do I do with my life?
And I do feel like that's maybe a blessing that we can't know those things ahead of time, that we don't know that future. Mm-hmm. Because and I describe it in the book, you get that superhuman power. Like, I didn't sleep, I didn't eat, I was just everything for him. What did he need? Every moment, I just kept going. And I never had that feeling like, okay, we're not going to do the next best thing. We're not going to help him. We're not going to, it was always, what's next?
Right.
I can do it.
Right. I'm going to read a few passages of your book. Some of your there's one part where some of your descriptions are pretty jarring because it's the reality of the situation. Not going to read some of that, but on page 103, you said, "I felt deep shame in the realization that it was hard to look at my baby. I didn't want to remember seeing him this way. It is hard enough to witness all that I had seen already, and this was way too much. I kept reminding myself that when this is all over, I would have plenty of time to see him the way God made him, not the way this disease has changed him. So I focused on his feet. This is a memory that brings pain and shame and a feeling of cowardice. It was the only part of him that still looked like my baby boy, feet that looked like his daddy's. But as a mom, it was devastating. I began having trouble eating. I spent the morning curled up on the cot crying. When I stood over him, all I could think about was that this mountain of issues he physically had to overcome was extensive and possibly insurmountable. I wasn't completely sure that he could do it. In place of blind optimism and assurance was dread." So you felt shame that you couldn't look at him?
For sure.
I mean, but doesn't it make sense though? It's just so painful. Did it feel like you were rejecting your son?
So, if you read the book,
Right.
This happened after I physically saw Jesus's face.
Right.
And this happened after we thought he was going to pass.
Right.
There was a big event, and they had to put him on ECMO, which is basically a machine takes all your blood out of your body and just does the work of your lungs and your heart. It's like the last effort of life-saving technology, and it is very dangerous. Necessary, but not where you want to be.
Right.
And so I had, in the book, I talk about the night that happened, we were waiting to hear, and I really didn't think he was going to survive the surgery because they told me he's too weak. He's not going to survive the night if we don't do it, and he might not survive the surgery. And so me, my husband, and my dad were in the next room at like 1 a.m, just waiting to see what happened in the surgery. And I looked up in the corner of the room and I saw Jesus. And it was strange. I didn't understand what it was. At the time, I thought maybe is he coming down to get my, is this it?
Yeah.
Is he going to die? And I can see
You're
his
fully
eyes.
awake.
Fully awake. Oh, yeah. We were praying and we had music going, and I had turned to hold on to my husband. We were sitting on the floor because there were no chairs. It was an empty room just right next door. And as I looked up in the corner, I saw Jesus's face. And he was on the cross, and it was like he was reaching down to me, but his hand was on the cross. And I could just see his eyes. And it wasn't scary. It was peaceful, but it was somewhat foreboding, like ominous. Not happy, not scary. I just didn't know what it meant. And after that, my ability to function changed. Like I had been going full speed, adrenaline, fight or flight the whole time, that whole 15 days.
Yeah.
And after that event, it changed. I couldn't eat any longer. I couldn't read. I hadn't cried really since we found out that he was diagnosed. And at this point, I couldn't control it anymore. I just couldn't do any of it.
Yeah.
And I wondered what that meant. And now that I look back, I can see it was because Jesus was preparing me to be in the place of Mary, losing her child. I'm not comparing myself to Mary. I'm not comparing Vinny to Jesus at all. Just in case anybody was worrying about that. But to being prepared for a mom to lose her son. And, there's a lot that took to get me there to realize that maybe that's what God meant. That's my best guess as to what he meant when I saw all this stuff. But yeah, it's harder in that point. And to feel all those feelings of being ashamed that I didn't do as much as I could, to not being able to look at him, because 18 days in the PICU with all the extensive life-saving treatment, it really does a lot on the body.
Right.
It's bad.
Right. It's just too painful to look at.
Too painful. And I had even said at that point, I know he doesn't need it because the machines were doing everything they could to save him. And so his body temperature was controlled by the machines. So they weren't covering him. He wasn't, he was just laying on the bed. And I asked them to cover him because I didn't want to remember any of this. I want to remember him as he is, so that when he's healthy, that's the picture I see, not this. This is too much for me to handle right now.
Mm-hmm. Is the trauma of losing a child, and as well as seeing him in this condition, like you hear in the mental health community, well, you need to process your trauma. Do you ever finish processing this sort of trauma? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it depends on what you have gone through and, how you look at each situation. I do absolutely think I had PTSD after.
Mm-hmm.
Not being able to eat, not being able to sleep, feeling stuck. After he passed, for months, I could not stop replaying every event in my head. Even one of our kindest nurses, he's talked about a lot in the book, he even said, are you able to think of Vinny before he got here? And I couldn't think of anything except all the things that we had experienced in the last 18 days. It was like a rolling loop in my head over and over, especially when I closed my eyes. There was no sleeping. I was just constantly going over what had happened. And my therapist at the time said, whenever you describe yourself as stuck, that means your brain is still processing what happened. It happened really fast and you went through a lot. I'm an artist. I am not in the medical profession. So there was no place in my brain for me to store all the things that I had really rapidly learned about death, really, and like trying to prevent it.
Yeah.
So I just didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
It took therapy and a lot of other stuff.
Yeah. Tell people, because I thought it was good insight for me as far as I'll say the blessing of being in shock and what it protects you from.
The blessing of what?
Being in shock.
Oh, right. So, I do talk about how, like, after it initially happens, you're kind of in this shocked state. It allows you to do the things that you probably wouldn't be able to do if you were really realizing what happened, like, do the funeral. And I don't even go into a lot of that stuff in the book because it is just too sad.
Yeah.
But there's one actual instance that's not in the book. The morning that he passed, we come home and we're having to tell everybody, and it sucks. Sorry. But it was rough. And my best friend, Faye, came running in the house, and I was upstairs curling my hair. And she's like, "What are you doing?" And I don't know. I was just curling my hair. In my mind, I thought, this is going to be a rough few days. If I curl my hair now, I don't have to think about it. To be doing that in that moment, I was clearly just not dealing with it. Or I was just so shocked that it just hadn't really sunk in yet. It was just like, how can you be doing something like that? And it happens all the time. You have this state where you're like, I guess I don't know what's next.
Is it a dulling of the emotions?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I even talk about it like a dreamlike fluid state, whereas every single minute of the time in the PICU is clear and crisp, and I can recall it all. After is what I called it. Things come in and out. I have memories of things and not of other things. I had to clarify with a lot of people. Were you there? Like, they're like, yeah, we had a full conversation, and I don't remember it. Like, it's just, you're almost just biding your time until all the stuff is done that needs to be done. All the people go home, and then it's like, I think God allows you to truly grieve.
Yeah. 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 I've heard when walking one of my good friends who lost her husband, my wife and I, really drew close to her. And I think through her, we learned that a lot of therapists or doctors would say the first year is kind of like a blur.
Yeah.
And the second year is harder.
Right. I would say it was a solid 3 months that I just have no idea what I did. I don't even know. I have no idea what happened. I'm thankful God had set us up in a position to where my parents had moved in, and they were in the process of finding their own home. But at the time, it just didn't work out, so they had to come move in with us. And my mom took care of everything. I don't know what I would have done if I was still responsible for feeding my family and doing all the daily things, because I just forgot it even existed.
Right.
I forgot that you had to cook dinner. I forgot that there was laundry. It just wasn't important. In fact, even being in the room with them when they were just watching, the most blissful, mind-numbing TV, it made me angry because nothing was important.
Yeah. So the Charles Stanley sermon. And am I reading correctly? This is the moment when you knew that Vinny was not going to be healed in the way that you wanted. And then after the sermon, that song came on. It was all just boom, boom, boom.
Yeah. So Charles Stanley is someone that my husband has always listened to. He grew up listening to Charles Stanley. I joke that, while he's amazing, like whenever I would hear his sermons, I would be like, oh, okay, Charles Stanley again, super intelligent, super blessed man. He knows the word of God, but he's not the most charismatic. And so I sometimes had a hard time listening. And sure enough, the morning that we found out so one of the side effects of ECMO is bleeding. And the biggest side effect, and often the cause for the low survival rate, is a brain bleed. And God had protected Vinny's brain up until this point. There was no cancer in his brain. And we said, as long as he is him, we will do whatever it takes. And so for that to be the final medical thing was kind of like, okay, It's every other system has gone. Now it's his brain. So that's a lot. But
And that's before you heard the sermon?
we were waiting to hear if he actually had a brain bleed. The indication was there, and so this was like 30 minutes. They had taken him down for a CT, and they brought him back up, and this was like 5 a.m., somewhere around there.
And you said it was uncommon for you and your husband to even get like a solid 30 minutes without someone coming in. So it's almost like God reserved some time and space for y'all to hear a sermon.
He did. I mean, it was so, and it gives me chills even just thinking about it now, because it was peaceful. Like it was early in the morning, so the low lights were on. And we were just, me and him sitting there holding Vinny's hand on either side. And I just was like, I'm waiting for the last piece of news that we need to hear to see if he's going to be okay or not. And I just needed God. And so typically when I need God, I'll turn on some Christian music. And so I went over to the radio and I turned it on. And since it was 5 a.m., they had Charles Stanley on, and he was specifically talking about God answering prayers in the worst times, and talking about Paul and him having a thorn in his side, and saying, sometimes you can beg and cry and plead, and heaven is absolutely silent. Like, what then? What does the Bible say about God?
Yeah, God basically told Paul, no, my grace is sufficient.
That's exactly it. And that was his verse. My grace is sufficient for you, and my power is made perfect in your weakness. And it was so repetitive. His like the things that he was saying, he said over and over and over. Sometimes God says yes. Sometimes God says wait. Sometimes God says my grace will get you through this. And that's when we knew, like, he did have the brain bleed, and this was the time that God was saying, no, I've given you my answer.
And before the doctors told y'all.
Yeah, they hadn't even come back yet. And then after that was the song that said, I'm giving this up for your purpose. And it's like, Chris and I didn't even say a word. This whole time we were just listening, and we just looked at each other and knew, like, this is it. This is God saying, this is the end. Sorry.
That's all right.
So, and then the doctors came in and they didn't even say anything. We both just shook our head, and they just shook their head, and we just all knew.
So I wrote down this quote, and not Andy Stanley, his dad, Charles Stanley, which is the greatest reward, which is the greatest answer to prayer, that God has to remove something in order for me to be at peace, or for God to be within me while the things that steal my peace can steal it. No longer. Have you ever thought, like, God, I would have learned a heck of a lot going through this, even if you would have spared Vinny?
For sure.
I would have learned.
Well, and over in the book,
you didn't have to take him.
Yeah, I say, what a miraculous thing. I'm waiting for this miracle because it is bad. And the things that are happening are bad. And there are so many people watching right now, because we did have quite a large following quickly at the time. And just for being, we're not anybody. We're just a normal family. We don't have any, it just happened to spread. And I repeatedly said, God is going to do something amazing, because we are so far down the line that it's got to be a miracle for this to pull through. And a lot of people are watching. So how great will that testimony be? And I waited for it. And I knew that that was what was going to happen. It's the learning process of me still being able to be faithful and to trust God, even though the answer was no, and my grace is sufficient, I think is potentially what he wanted out of this. Like, would I be sitting here today talking to people? And my whole point for writing the book was not for, just anybody. Everybody can read it, and I pray that God speaks to people however they need to hear if they read my book. But it was to be a voice for mothers who had just lost a child, because there wasn't that voice for me. And I just felt like this is a voice that needs to be out there, because it does happen. And you need somebody to turn to say, am I going to be okay? I don't think I'm going to be. Can you help me? Are you okay? Did you survive this? And there was only one person that I heard. And I, to this day, remember her. And she had lost a 10-year-old probably 30 years before. And so that was helpful to see. But I was like, I scoured books. I read all kinds of books about, children dying. And while it's prevalent in other countries, it's just not here, or you just don't hear about it. So being able to write this book and write what I went through and the things that I think that God showed me and wanted to share with other people is kind of why I did it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You articulated pain so well. And on page 199, it says, scorched, black like a dry and cracking wasteland. I feel hollow and beaten, broken and bleeding. With every breath, smoke fills my lungs from my scorched interior. And while I may be walking and talking, emotionally I am weak and beaten, sprawled out on the floor, unable to lift a finger, but you will never know. I will keep my pain buried in private, alone and dark, because who could survive being scorched on both the inside and the outside? No one. Excuse my wording when I say that I love when God gave you some words for what you were feeling, and it was in Psalms 34:18. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And it was almost like a light bulb went off. You're like, I'm crushed in spirit.
Crushed.
My spirit is crushed.
Yes, everything.
Like it doesn't get any
crushed.
worse than that. Your soul is just crushed.
Yeah. So that was actually a journal entry I had written during the 3-month time after. I just felt like, I'm a kind of a private person, which is funny because I wrote a book, but so you're not really going to see me in true emotion outside of my private time. I'm just not comfortable there. It's not something I really do. I just won't. And so that was a journal entry I had wrote about how I was feeling. And, I was calling out to God, like, tell me something. I need anything. And when you feel God so close in those times, it's like you crave it more, not because you don't believe it, but just because it is so helpful. And it does, I know you had said this in the remarks, but it does bring a peace that should not be there. Like in those moments with Charles Stanley, when he was telling us like, hey, this is it. This is the end. The answer is no. It was peaceful, not in a I accept it kind of way or in a good relieving kind of way, but in a way that says you shouldn't be feeling this. You should absolutely be freaking out right now, but my peace is overtaking it. And he did fill us with that. Like even the nurse was like, I have never seen two parents so united in the front in this decision and just confident in that this is what was supposed to happen.
Which reminds me, and I've said this many times because we get into theological conversations often on this podcast, but I feel like we've made a lot of scripture, different promises that we say God has given that I think a lot of them, it's like, I don't think that's what it's saying.
Yeah.
But one that we can take to the bank is, I will always be with you.
Yes.
And that's what it feels like God revealed by communicating to you and your husband, hey, I mean, y'all felt it in your heart. Where else could that come from?
Right.
Other than God and him being with you?
And for my husband and I to both take the same, assumption from what God was saying and to both just be 100% like this is the end and not be okay with it, but accept it. I mean, that's just only from God.
Yeah. I have learned, again, walking people through deep grief, losing spouses, losing children, that it's very unhelpful and very potentially harming terminology to use the phrase moving on from, like it's not something you move on from, but using the same language, scriptural language of being crushed in spirit. Is there an ongoing crushedness that you'll always carry with you?
So...
Because it says he's going to save those who's crushed in spirit. So are you in need of daily saving?
Always. I mean, I think everybody is.
Yeah.
And, something I didn't really like that one of the grief programs has said is you need to get used to your new title, like no longer being this person's spouse, or, your name changes or the address changes. Like you have to accept that new title as something different. And my response was no. I will never not be Vinny's mom.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
Vinny will always be my child. That's not something I'm willing to let go. And if that's not correct, I think God will forgive me for that and know that that's my humanness. But no, I'll always carry it.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to put this down. Like it's something that I'll carry in my heart forever. Like even the trauma, I pray daily that, God helps me through it and that I can help others maybe if they need it. But Yeah, no, it's something I'll always carry. Maybe not crushed in spirit, because I do believe that God has given me the ability. It's been 4 years now, so while that's not a long time, like, I'm here. So he's doing something.
Yeah. Does the pain become less intense, or do you become more equipped to deal with it?
Yeah, I think number 2.
Yeah.
Something I always loved, it says, like, the grief never lessens. You just grow around it. And so, like, I always just imagine it as it's there. I'm just growing around it slowly. It's something I'll just always have.
Are there ever times when emotionally, in the depths of your spirit, you feel like you almost went back to day one of losing him, and you have to kind of do a mental adjustment?
So I'm really good at compartmentalizing and potentially denying my feelings. I know that's not healthy, but it's called survival sometimes.
Yeah.
I know that's not what a therapist will tell you should do, but we all have to deal with it the best we can, right? And so, yes, there are days when I just feel, rough, especially like for this. Like I said, I'm good at compartmentalizing, so there's a lot of those details that you put away and you just don't revisit. It took a long time for me to get there because a lot of them were relentless, and like it says in there, an assault to your mind of things that were happening. But I have been able to put a lot of those away. And so to be here, I needed to make sure that I was fresh on the things that I had wanted to say. And so I did have to reread it on Monday, and that's very hard. It's just like reliving it over again, because I am not just reading it, I'm seeing it. And so I'm back there in the hospital.
Revisiting,
and that's hard.
Yeah.
It's definitely hard. So it's easier for me to not revisit.
Yeah.
It's just a survival choice, I guess. Doesn't mean it's not there. Doesn't mean I'm not carrying it. It just means I'm not dwelling on it at the moment.
Yeah. There's so many ways to tribute you as a mother, and I felt like reading this would be one way. This kid has gone through so much already. The last thing he needs is to wake up with his foot amputated. There's a condition called drop foot. Am I saying that right? Where basically it's a cut off of blood circulation because his feet is...
So usually when you're, when you lay down, your feet are like this. But when you've been laying down for so long and your muscles atrophy and your system, and he was on life support, so the blood circulation was different in his body, eventually you lose the ability to keep your feet up, so and your feet drop, and it's almost like the tops bend. And that's not something they want to happen.
Yeah.
So they put boots on so that they stay in this position for certain times a day. It's a physical therapy.
Right.
But because he was on ECMO, it had stayed on too long.
Yeah. So it says, so I stood there by his bedside for 2 straight hours, massaging his calf and foot, being careful not to hurt his delicate, blistering skin, willing the blood to make it to the end of his toes. With every stroke, I prayed for God to save his foot. By the end of the night, the color had returned, and I collapsed into my chair with a whimpering sigh of relief. It was another small answered prayer, and yet a huge, huge win. Like, I just get this visual of Mama Bear looking after every little detail and doing everything she can for every little detail. And yet it sounds like you still needed your dear friend to say, well done, Mama.
Yeah, that was something that spoke really deeply to my soul that I didn't even know I needed at the time. Like the foot thing, I think every mom or parent is in that position. Like when something is happening, and he was so sick that he had 3 dedicated nurses just for his care, and then a lot of other people helping. Like, the support team comes in and they change him and roll him, and a lot of people were taking care of him, and all kinds of therapists. But, when you're sitting there and I'm just seeing this potential, issue, I'm like, it was just a no, this is not going to happen. I will do everything in my power to stop this one more thing. And it was literally, as I describe it, I just collapsed in my chair, oh, thank God. Thank you, God, for not putting us in this position to where he was going to have to lose a foot.
Yeah.
I just couldn't deal with that.
Yeah.
And, but when your child dies, and I say that because it's what happened. There's ways to say it easier that will be easier for people, but I find saying the real thing is a little bit more just people can understand it. Whoa, yeah, okay, this is what we're talking about. As a mom, the number one bar is to keep your kid alive. When they're doing the crazy things, when they're getting in trouble, when they're learning to jump off a couch, just like my 2-year-old is doing right now. She's having a blast just jumping off the couch. It's like, you do everything you can to keep them safe and protect them. And when all of a sudden you couldn't and they're gone, there's this immense guilt. It's my fault. And even if it's not my fault, I didn't give my child cancer. What did? Why didn't I see it earlier? Why didn't I question those doctors? Why didn't I push? Why didn't I notice the bruises on his legs for what they were?
Almost like I could have done something.
I should have. Yeah, I needed to. I should have known.
But you did do you think, because I don't want to say this in any sort of denigrating way, do you think that was irrational? Because from the outside looking in, I'm like, you did everything you could.
I think it's a natural response as a mom to the loss of a child. Like, and really to anyone. Like, you lose a loved one. Did I say the right things? Did we end the right way? Did I, was I there for them the way I should have been? I could have done more, always. You kind of, it's a natural response, I think, to think I should have and could have done more. And God was just really clear in saying, this wasn't up to you.
And that clarity came when your friend...
Yes. So somebody that had been my 3 a.m. friend, 3 a.m. is a really hard time. And when you're awake at 3 a.m., as I was every morning in the hospital, I was just like, that's what time I woke up. I slept from 9 to 11 and then 12 to 3. That was it. And so at 3 a.m., nobody else is awake. And it's a hard time because your brain won't stop. And I had one of my mentors would message me between 3 and 4. That was her Bible time. And she would just send me words of encouragement. And I just always looked forward to that because nobody else was up, and it was a word from God that I felt. I trusted her as someone who knew seriously God's word. And so when he died, the message she sent me, the first message was, "Job well done, Mama." And that was hard for me. Because I didn't feel that way. I didn't feel it was a job well done, but I did feel like it was God saying, "Job well done. You did what you could. And I told you what my decision was." So anytime I do face that guilt or that condemnation of, you should have done more, I remember those words.
Go back to that? Yeah. Why you made very clear that why is not something that you really revisit or ask.
Yes. So I'm kind of a practical person in that sometimes I don't see the point of asking why. And I think it's important to say, because I see people lose years of their life asking why. I think it's easy to get fixated on, why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to him? Why did God cause this? I think and you can really get stuck in that because you cannot get an answer. And any answer you got will never be okay. Like, even if God told me this is why this had to happen, in me as a human and as a mother, I would be like, well, I'm not okay with that. That's not something I can accept. It's not something I understand, but I trust that God has a reason, and I'll find that out when I get to heaven, and by then I'll be okay with it. But right now, I don't see a point in fixating on the why, because I know it can destroy everything around me. It can destroy my marriage. It can destroy my relationship with my other children, my job, it can destroy those things if you get so stuck on why did this happen? Because even if you get an answer, it won't be good enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to, it's a podcast, so I can't, but I want to slow down and process that. That's really good stuff. I love what you said, and I may not articulate it as poignantly as you did, but walking into a grocery store, seeing people, and they have no clue what's behind the person that they're seeing as you're checking your groceries out. They have no idea what you've gone through. And then you flip that around with everyone you encounter. And I just thought, what a good reminder, especially in society where everybody seems to be mad at each other and we're so polarized and everything. But reflect on that out loud. I just thought it was a good reminder.
So one of the things that I just thought was so important about this was that in the time of the after, right after, I would be doing mundane things like being in the grocery store or being somewhere, and literally it would be happening. I would still be seeing flickers of what would happen in my mind. Like I said, it was a constant reel. I was seeing him in the hospital. I was seeing myself there. I was seeing all the horrible things that happened while we were there. And I'm just standing there quietly waiting in line. And it's like, these people don't know what I'm suffering through right this very moment. They have no idea. And how much more true is it that I have no idea what they're suffering? And I talk about that. Like, did the person in front of you that has her little baby who's screaming and crying and just taking up time, did it take 4 babies to get there? Like the person behind me, did he just get a divorce? our world is so broken and there's so much hardship and so much heartbreak. It's like just having a little bit of compassion to realize that maybe it's just not all about me. And maybe that the people around me are suffering too. I just don't know it. A kind word can go so far. Like maybe I don't know what's happening around me just as much as they don't know what I'm suffering with.
Yeah. Yeah. So eternity, how much of a role does that play?
Huge.
Yeah.
It's so funny because the Bible says, have a heaven-minded, I forget the word, but focus on heaven, and before, it's kind of like one of those things that'll happen one day. I'm not going to think about it too much because it's a little confusing. It's hard to understand. I don't really want to think about dying. So, heaven's there, I get it, but I'm not really going to look into it. And now it's like part of my heart is there.
Oh, yeah. And you've read a lot of books on
I have. Yeah. I dove into what can I possibly learn about heaven, and I learned a lot of cool things. The book Imagine Heaven by John Burke was instrumental, and I think anybody who's dealing with loss should read that book. It's a lot of near-death experiences, and people from all religions, all countries, all different ethnicities tell their experience of what happened when they were dead.
I know, and it's crazy. Like people from other religions are like, "That's Jesus Christ."
Yes, yeah, and they don't always accept when they come back.
Mm-hmm.
They know it, they just don't accept it, and I don't know what that's about. There's a lot that can be unpacked there, but. It made me realize like, hey, this is a real thing. And I feel like part of me is already there. And now I can't wait to the day. I had this, like you said, I get pictures of things. I don't know. Maybe that's just how God talks to me. I don't know why. I don't know how. I just trust it. And so one of them was, we were in a Bible study talking about, when you are in the place of judgment, when you get to heaven and you're standing in front of God and he says, do you belong up here? What did you do? And I just had this picture, no words were spoken, of Jesus walking up next to me because, I've accepted Jesus. I know he's my savior and I know that I'm going to be with him. I just had this picture of him walking up to me and me seeing him and no words were spoken and me just jumping into his arms. Like, I don't care about my salvation in this moment. I'm just so excited to see you, this person that I have followed my whole life, that you've been there with me and I want to be close to you.
Faith becomes sight.
And just being with Jesus, like not even, I'm standing at my judgment and all I care about is that I get to see Jesus. And I just thought that was such a beautiful thing because, it's just not something you think about, like, will I get into heaven? Am I on the right side? Did I do the right things? There's always that question. And this was just like, that doesn't matter. It's you believed in him and now you get to see him. Yeah.
When you think about seeing Vinny again, do you think what, because I've heard theories that we're all going to be the same age in heaven, or do you probably think of him as he was before he got sick?
So I think none of us will know till we get there. And
Right.
I've read a lot of different things, I think it's just something we don't get to know yet. And it is fun to think about. I've thought about or heard people say that I'll recognize him as the Vinny that I knew, and then I'll see him in his process of growing. That kids still grow up in heaven. It's just a different kind of timeline since there is no time. That he's an adult in his full prime. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be, but when it's the right time, I'll get to know. Yeah.
And I want to say Randy Alcorn, he's the one that wrote Heaven. I want to say that he said something along the lines, and I believe that God is going to redeem what you went through and what was lost here on this earth with Vinny. He's going to redeem it in ways that's a blessing to you that I won't experience having not lost a kid. Not in a way of me being shortchanged, just in a way you lost a child during your lifetime. I'm going to make that up for you in a special way.
Well, and there was, I heard a lot when I was, searching, like why, and you still always ask the question why. Your soul asks the question why. You don't even have to say it. It's just there. I just choose not to ruminate on it. But God will restore what the locusts have eaten.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I don't understand, God. You can't give me back my son. He's not coming back. So how will that be restored to me? I don't get it. Does that mean just in heaven?
That's right.
Just when I get to heaven? But I do think that there's ways that God gives us joy here that I couldn't see coming. For instance, we adopted a little girl and she is just pure joy. And I could not have seen that coming. He was very clear in that she was for us, and just some of the things that happened. I'm like, you're so cool that you can do it this way. And there's a lot of that in the book. But it does not take away what happened. It does not lessen my grief. It does not make it okay for me of what happened with Vinny. I'm never going to, I accept it, but I'm never going to be okay with it. But it gives me a new joy, something new. Like two things can exist. You can be both grieving and joyful at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. So people can get this book at the Seacoast bookstore, Amazon.
Yep, Amazon. And I tried to make it as inexpensive as possible. Even the Kindle is the lowest they'll let me make it, because I really just wanted it to be for anybody who's, suffering or, finds themselves in a place where they need a voice.
Yeah. And I just want to make clear to readers or listeners, potential readers, like I would highly encourage, if you know of a parent who have lost a child, to send this on. And you speak a lot of words of life, and God spoke, and peace and his presence, but you do not sugarcoat the pain. You don't put a God Band-Aid and say everything's fine, because that's not helpful and it's not true. And that's not what your book does at all.
A lot of times they're non-believers.
Right.
So how do you say God's got this when they don't believe? Mm-hmm. That means nothing to them. It means everything to me, but they might not have the same understanding. They might not be in the same place I am in their faith.
Yeah.
And so I tried to write this in a way that shows how God was there for me and how you can look to him to do the same for you. God is sitting next to you, waiting for you to just turn your head and say, I need you. Please, come to me, and he will be there for you.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about Map Mom.
So Map Mom is my company, and we make wood maps. We started in Charleston about 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And we sell to over 700 stores around the United States. We do local maps on wood, and it started with my art. I went to art school, so this is my creative outlet.
They're very cool. So is the turtle like a Christmas ornament?
I do lots of ornaments. They're actually on Amazon now. You can get them on my website. You can get them in coastal stores all around the United States with their local maps. It's a great commemorative. And yeah, our ornaments are huge right now. They just do really well. Those are all on Amazon under Map Mom.
Yeah. Well, I want to close with you telling us the flower that Vinny sent you from heaven.
Yeah, so like I said, there's a lot of cool things that God did to show me that he was with me. And so when Vinny was in third grade, when he got sick, and they had just planted seeds, and I didn't find out later that the seeds were random. It was not just marigolds. They were just random seeds, any kind of flowers. And Vinny happened to pick the marigold because he had planted them with his grandma for years before that. And so he planted the marigold, and when he found out he was sick, he was really upset because he wouldn't get to take care of his seed. He was worried it was going to die. And my mom said, while you're in the hospital, I will take care of it for you. I'll make sure it gets watered and gets sun. And then he passed, really fast. It was just a couple weeks. And this was in April. And then in May, it was Mother's Day, and supremely bittersweet, more bitter than sweet, I just happened to look outside, and there was this perfect, beautiful red marigold bloom in the cup that he had planted. And it just was like, Vinny sent me flowers from heaven. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it was so sweet. It was so perfect. It was just like another one of those clarity moments where you're like, wow, that's crazy. And so we used the flower as a way to make a charity called One Small Seed. I'm not doing it anymore just because it is very hard to run a charity and your own business with all the red tape. But it did a lot of good for the time we did it. And it was one of those things where I felt God was just giving me the strength and the power from the Holy Spirit to do something crazy. And the marigold was what kind of filmed it. That's what my earrings are, Vinny's little marigold.
Nice. Yeah. Nice. Well, this book and now having talked to you, it feels like a labor of Jesus's love. Like this was not this was not easy to write. It was not easy to revisit. It wasn't easy for you to go back over it before this interview, and yet you want other mothers to have this. So thanks for writing it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You've been watching Seacoast Church's Things You Won't Hear on Sunday podcast. You can now become a patron of this podcast and receive exclusive content. Your support goes towards Seacoast ministry efforts and local presence. Also, be sure to leave us a review and subscribe to this podcast so that you get these episodes as soon as they're released. All of this information can be found in the show notes. Thanks for watching.